Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel, Kalanati. Today I'm going to embark on a series of catch-up wrap-ups. I'm hoping to just do rapid-fire reviews of a bunch of the stuff that I've read over the last 4 or 5 months. Because I just want to mention them, you know? But because I did read most of these books literally months ago, I'm not going to have as much to say about them, so this hopefully will be short. I would like to do some shorter wrap-ups and not have massive things to film and then edit. So this video is going to be everything that I read in the second half of February, which is about 8 things. The last time I did a proper reading wrap-up was my February part 1 wrap-up. So as of me filming this today, that was literally like 4.5 months ago, I think. So it's been a while. Anyway, let's get into these books. So the first thing I have to talk about is Himawari House by Harmony Becker. This is a like young adult / new adult coming of age graphic novel. It follows a young woman who has taken like a gap year between high school and college. She goes to study in Japan and kind of to rediscover the language and her heritage. She is Japanese American, and living in Japan and being immersed in the language and just living in a home with other foreign exchange students there, she learns a lot about herself. And the story also follows the other people that she lives with. I think one of the women there is from Korea. Another one I think is from Malaysia or the Philippines. So they are all like non-native speakers of Japanese and everything. And I think it was so interesting how language was conveyed in this. Basically everyone speaks with an accent, and that is rendered in like the dialogue, and that's very important. That was very intentional, according to the author's notes. There's also like whenever a character is listening to somebody speak but can't understand all of the words, that is also conveyed. And I thought that was just really clever, and it really expressed something about the experience of trying to understand another language, that you can kind of get the gist of it but not all the exact words. It was really interesting. I picked this up on a whim from the library and had no idea that I would enjoy it so much, but I actually like really remember it more strongly than some other things I read that long ago, and I would really highly recommend it. It was a good story, had some really good characters and some things to say that I think were important, and I did also enjoy the artwork. Next is a nonfiction book called Big Friendship: How We Keep Each Other Close by Aminatou and Anne Friedman. So I have never followed the podcast that I think this book is kind of a follow-up to, but I have been familiar with the creators for a while. I know they've been mentioned in other things that I've read, so I was really interested in reading this book because I thought it was going to be an exploration of the challenges of making new friends and making really good friends as an adult. You know, when you get into your 20s and 30s and 40s and it becomes so difficult to become really good friends with people. And how do you do that? How do you like nurture that kind of friendship? What is that like? And instead of being that, this book was much more of like a post-mortem of the author's relationship, how they met, the difficulties they went through. They actually went to like couples counseling to save their friendship, and what's next for them pretty much. So in this way, I feel like it's kind of a follow-up to their podcast, which is also about their friendship. And I just felt like there was nothing I could take from this that was really applicable to my own experience. It was an interesting enough story about a friendship, but the way the information was portrayed, it was almost more autobiographical, I would say. And I didn't love the point of view that they used. The book switches between them talking about I and talking about we. And there's a reason why they did that, because they're telling their separate stories from their individual viewpoints, and then they're talking about things that they did together. So I understand the authorial choice here to write it in that way, but it was very awkward. I'm not sure I could come up with a better way of doing it, but it just did not gel for me the way they kept switching back and forth like that. So this was a perfectly fine book that ultimately was not about the thing I really wanted it to be, and I just didn't get much out of it. So that was a little bit disappointing, but I did finally read it after years of wanting to. A really fun book, which I just realized I cannot describe the plot of, is A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske. Or is it Marske? I'm not entirely sure. I should look up the pronunciation of her name. So A Marvellous Light is one of those really hyped fantasy romances. It follows a man who discovers that magic exists. He is cursed, and then he meets another man from a very prominent magical family who is trying to break his curse, and they're also trying to like solve a mystery, like who cursed this man and why, and what nefarious deeds are they up to, and all the while they are falling in love with each other and really want to get into each other's pants. This was a very fun read. I super enjoyed it, and it's also one of those books that I kept losing back to the library while I was in the middle of reading it, so it was a very disrupted reading experience, but I finally finished it. It was so good. I will read the sequel or follow or whatever it is that I think is coming out at the end of this year or next year. I just really enjoyed this, and I feel like A Marvellous Light has some of the same vibes or like premise similarities to Witchmark by C.L. Polk, which I also really liked, but I felt like Witchmark left me with a little bit more of a melancholic feel. Whereas with A Marvellous Light, I was very excited while reading it. So there you go, if that helps anybody. Next is One Year at Ellsmere by Faith Erin Hicks. This is a, I don't know, young adult boarding school semi-fantasy comic. That is all I could tell you about it. I remember nothing of this. I just wanted to read something by Faith Erin Hicks, and I guess it was okay because I finished it, but that's as far as my memory goes. Another slightly disappointing comic is Lumberjanes Volume 20, End of Summer. This is the conclusion to the very long-running Lumberjanes series, which follows the antics at like a magical summer camp for girls and basically anyone else. I think it's literally billed as a summer camp for girls, but there are non-binary and trans characters in this. Anyway, if you've been here for a long time, you may remember that Lumberjanes was one of my favorite comics ever. It was on my auto-buy list, and I'm extremely picky about which comics and manga I actually purchase. So I loved like the first 10 volumes of Lumberjanes. It was just really fun and humorous. It had like beautiful, super vibrant artwork. It was just unique. It was its own thing, and it was so cool and so fun. And then it just got run into the ground. This series should have been about 10 volumes long, and instead it was 20, and I just stuck it out to the end because I felt some sort of, I guess, loyalty to the original creators or something. Volume 20 does conclude the story, but it didn't really give me what I wanted. I think what I really wanted was to see the world outside of the summer camp, and maybe that breaks the spell somewhat, but I felt like I would have gotten more from the characters' individual story arcs and stuff if I had been able to see them at the point that they were at home. When they went back to their families, you know, did they stay in contact and remain friends outside of the summer camp? And what was it like for them to go back to a much more mundane, non-magical world? I don't know. So what I wanted probably was never going to happen. The end of the series was never going to be fantastic. It was going to be very difficult to bring it back from the mediocrity that it sank into, but it was okay. Let's say that. I finished the series. Maybe someday I'll go back and reread some of the earlier volumes that I own, but I feel like this entire comic series is a really big warning that like sometimes you just shouldn't drag out a good thing. End it when it needs to be ended, and everybody will be much happier for it. Next is Take a Look at the 5 and 10 by Connie Willis. I'm very sorry to Connie Willis, who is a brilliant writer, but this novella was so terribly average. I had to like look it up again to remember anything about it. It is a Christmas story and it has to do with memories, as that's pretty much all I can remember. Connie Willis actually writes quite a few like novellas and short stories that are Christmas themed, and in fact I think she has an entire collection a lot like Christmas that is just Christmas stories, and I really enjoy that about her stuff. Like, her dedication to Christmas stories is really fun. This one though, I just was like, no. And also, why is it called Take a Look at the 5 and 10? Shouldn't it be Take a Look at the 5 and Dime? Or is that just a phrase that doesn't mean what I think it means? Anyway, another thing that I read, something really good and an actual good end to a series, is Leviathan Falls by James S.A. Corey. I listened to this on audiobook and it is the 9th and final book in the long-running Expanse series. This has been one of my favorite science fiction series that I've ever read. It's been so good and so solid. One of those rare series that just gets better after the first third or so. And I cannot say anything about it because it's the end and that would be super spoilery, but I thought it was a good end. And I think that one of the best things about this is that the authors, like, number one, they weren't super precious about their characters and giving everybody a happy ending, which is a direction they could have gone in, but that was hopefully never gonna happen. But it was tonally very consistent all the way to the end, and the way that everything shakes out at the end for the remaining characters and factions and everything, it just felt kind of realistic. And also sad, but like also saying this isn't the end, there will always be something more after this. And I liked that a lot. I imagine that the authors will write more in the Expanse universe at some point. There's nothing that says that they won't, but I also feel that they're gonna leave this series as very definitely its own thing, and I hope that's true because it's done and it was good and it doesn't need to be meddled with anymore. So that's my thoughts on the end of The Expanse. And lastly, for this batch of books, I read Rabbits by Terry Miles. This is a science fiction thriller, and I believe it is an original story set in the Rabbits podcast world that Terry Miles also creates. I am not familiar with this podcast at all. I just read this book for part of like a book club and it was really fun. I think all of us that read it and discussed it enjoyed it a lot. Like, it was just a really fun read, but it also just got a little bit more convoluted and wishy-washy, vague, timey-wimey than it needed to be. The really fun part of this book is that the premise is that ordinary people can notice like hidden clues and coincidences and strange connections between things in the real world, and it's part of this rabbits game that you can win. But then by the end of the book, it goes into like woo-woo interdimensional supernatural territory that has no actual explanation, and that was very disappointing. So it was really good up until the end, and I think there's probably going to be another book in this world. I will probably try to read it because all in all, it was actually a pretty fun sci-fi thriller. And that is everything that I read back at the end of February. So let me know if you also read any of these. Do you have any thoughts on them? Leave them down in the comments for me. And I'll be back to talk to you again soon about more things that I read. And until then, bye.